Yeah. So we are discussing about this k-means clustering, and in the last class we discussed the basic algorithm and some of its merits and demerits that we discussed. Now, one of the uh, issue in k-means clustering is that how do you get the number of cluster? Because in the algorithm itself, this number is a hyperparameter, which means we assume a number of clusters, the number of clusters which is available, and with that assumption, uh, is no you compute to get a partition of that many partitions. So usually there are different ways this number could be obtained. Like in practical scenario, sometimes from the domain knowledge itself, these numbers are derived. For example, if you are going to classify, say, pixels of an image, then you may consider that there are, say, it's a document image. So you can consider that what are the different kinds of segments or types of segments are there in the document, maybe background, maybe text, maybe graphics. So there, depending upon the content, you can always consider that no, what could be a number and use it while doing this kind of partition. But automatically, if you would like to do it, that means you have simply a data set. So you have the distribution of the data with you. But from there, can you choose an appropriate value of k? So one of the very naive technique, and that is what usually it is followed, that why don't you perform partitioning for many possible values of k and choose that partition which is which looks good or which satisfies certain kind of based on certain criteria. So so this kind of criteria, there are certain metrics by which you can judge that how good is a clustering or how good is the partitioning associated with that clustering. So one of these kind of metric is that cluster validity index. Now, it is not, it's a class of metrics, which means there could be different ways this index could be measured, which will measure the strength of the clustering itself. And depending upon the interpretation of that particular metric, that means whether the higher value is better or not, depending upon that, you consider. I think someone's microphone is on. So depending upon that, you maximize or minimize based upon the values of the metric and based upon the properties of the metrics with respect to the clustering. This is one kind of technique. The other technique would be that you may consider in k-means clustering algorithm, you can see that it depends upon initialization. The result depends upon initializations. Now, if I consider a suitable value of k should be such that whatever may be your initialization, your end result would be almost similar. So that is called, the property is reflected by the name of this property is stability of the clustering. That means at that value of k, your clustering is quite stable. Now, this can be also used. This can be also used for determining the value of k, which means you have to, of course, observe several times. You have to run several times k-means algorithm with different initializations and observe the stability of the results from each one. I mean, stability of the results collected, collection of results. And again, there are also different measures of stability, like the validity indices. So some of the examples of these validity indices that I will be discussing here very briefly. So you can have external indices using a reference partitioning information, for example, class levels, which means that you are considering it is actually used for comparing different clustering algorithms. Uh, Mostly with respect to K, uh, I should say, um, I mean, if the value of K is known, uh, because your class levels are known means value of K is also known, then when you are comparing different clustering algorithms, including K-means algorithm, there this kind of indices are more useful. So you have already the class levels. So when you do clustering without using class levels, of course, it's an unsupervised learning or unsupervised method by which you get a partition. Then you observe how consistent are the, how consistent is a cluster with respect to a class. That means a cluster should be ideally uh, very homogeneous with respect to a class. So we measure these things, and one of the metric is normalized mutual information. So with respect to particular, say, partitions, set of partitions, uh, what we can do, we can consider that uh, given a sample y and say what is the probability of that uh, particular sample for a particular cluster. So you get the overall probability. That means probability distributions of um, samples belongingness to a particular class and also a cluster. And then you consider the mutual informations and we normalize it. Uh, as you can see in the denominator part, it is basically the average of the entropies of the two sets, like one for the clusters, another for the class distribution. So for the cluster distribution and class distribution, Y represents here, say, cluster distributions, and C represents here class distributions. So between these two distributions, you define the mutual information, and which can be defined in this way. Say, as I mentioned, that uh, uh, it is basically HY, that means entropy of the cluster distribution minus the conditional entropy of this cluster distribution given the class, or the other way also you can say. That is the mutual information, but it is normalized by the average of uh, entropies of the both the distributions. So we use this NMI, and if your NMI is higher, the better is that clustering given the corresponding class levels. So this is one very standard technique of uh, comparing different clustering algorithms when we give you a labeled data set. There is another way of measuring this kind of, evaluating this kind of clustering is that, it is called FM index. What it does, it is simply computing the fraction of same pairs in same clusters, which means, you have, you consider, say, if there are n samples, you can consider n choose 2 pairs. Now, out of n choose 2 pairs, you find out that you consider those pairs which are belonging to, for example, the same classes. So actually, for every class, you consider the pairs which are having the same class level, and you can see that whether it is there, this pair is also belonging to a particular cluster, the same cluster. Then actually you are counting that. So for every such possibilities, what is the fraction? It need not be n choose 2, as you can see it. You are only considering those events when they occur in the same class. So only those pairs are considered, and for each one you are checking that whether they are occurring in the same cluster, in a particular cluster. And then you find out that how many times it has occurred. So that kind of news. I think someone's microphone is still, yeah. So you can have also certain matching measures like finding matching partition pairs and maximal common coverage, which means that you are trying to find out that which partition uh, maximally covers the cluster. So it is basically association between partition and classes, cluster and classes. And from there you find out what is the maximal common coverage. So it is not precisely defined here. The idea is given. So you can see it's a kind of bipartite matching problem. Uh, these are certain external indices because your class levels are given. So external information as a class levels that is available, then only you can use this kind of indices or measures. Now, there are certain internal indices, and in fact, those are more useful with respect to this finding out the value of k. And these internal indices, they look at the variance distribution and structure of clusters. So one of the uh, index very commonly used for this purpose is called silhouette index. So what it does, it measures a quantity. This is a SX, and for every point, every data point. What is this? These are the let us understand. See, AX here, it is the average distance of points within the cluster from X. So you consider a data point X, and with respect to that partition, you know that which cluster it belongs to, and then compute the average distance points within that cluster from that. That means this point as if it is a center, and from that center you are trying to find out what could be a radius by which you can draw a hypersphere or circle if in 2D, so that all the points in that cluster will be there, right? So that is the interpretation of AX. And on the other hand, Dx is the minimum average distance of points of other clusters, which means you consider it's a kind of separability criteria, separability property. That means for that point, you consider every cluster separately and find out the minimum average distance for each of them, but you choose which one also the minimum. So you compute the average distance for each of them, and you choose the minimum of them. That is what is means. So Sx is a kind of silhouette index. We call it silhouette index for X, but for the whole partition, naturally you have taken aggregated measure, and that aggregated measure is the average of Sx's. So this is your final silhouette index. And as you can see that in this case, the higher this index, it is better, and this index will lie within this range, -1 and 1, because you are measuring a difference, and which is sign difference. So towards 1, it is better. Towards -1, there are a lot of overlapping. Kalinski had a bus index. It is by the corresponding proposers, researchers who have proposed this one, and it has been shown that it is also a good measure. So this index is using the sum of square of error for every value of k. For at every value of k, it is computing its sum of square of error, and it compares with respect to the k equal to 1 case. So k equal to 1 is basically, as you can see, it's a centrality measure. Its sum of square of error is effectively the variance measure there. Of course, in the context of distances there. So with respect to this, it tries to find out this index, and here also it is, if it is higher and better. So usually the methodology involves that for certain in certain range of k, usually, as you understand in practical problems, k should not be too high. K should be between certain some number which maybe say 2 to 10 kind of thing, or 2 to 15. It is difficult to put a limit theoretically, but in practical problems we can have certain kind of some understanding what could be the minimum and what could be the maximum. So within that range, you enumerate for every k, and then choose the k value of k where you get the best index. So this is the method by which you can determine the value of k. that is based on the validity index based method. I told that mostly internal indices are very useful in this respect. Whereas the other method, that is stability check based clustering, and as I mentioned that in this case we observe the end results for different initial points, that means initializations, and more or less those results should be similar. So that is what you have repeated clustering and should have similar partitioning. So there are certain measures of stability. One of the method is Wang's method of cross validation. So what it does that you can uh, permute the input data C times, and then each time you divide into 3 parts, right? And then what you are doing, like in 3 parts, as you can see that first 2 parts are of same number, same number of samples or data points, and S3 is naturally the rest of the things. And you have to perform k-means on S1 and S2. Because it is random, your cluster representatives should be similar for a good value of k. That is what we consider. And test on S3, both cases to find the cluster numbers. Now, as I was mentioning, that since you are testing, you can use some kind of nearest neighbor rules for cluster centroids. And then you are expecting that if again you can use FM measure kind of thing with respect to this. So you have a sample, and you can, if you consider a pair of samples in S3, now uh, if they occur at the same cluster of S1, it is expected they should occur also in the same cluster of S2. That is kind of stability that is captured in the stability measure. So we compute the number of such disagreements. So a pair being in the same or different clusters. So that is the disagreements, and take the average over C observations. So naturally, as I was mentioning, for good value of K, now this should be, that number of disagreements should be small. So that is the kind of measure for stability check based clustering. I will take just 2 minutes break and then I will join. Now we will be discussing another approach where actually this is a kind of generalization of k-means approach. As you can see in the k-means, we consider a level or a belongingness of a data point to a cluster is very hard decision. That means either it belongs to one of those clusters. Now, instead of that, if we have a probabilistic reasoning or probabilistic description, that means every cluster, every element has certain probability for its belongingness to one of these k clusters. Now, we are assuming that every cluster is representing certain probability density functions over the sample space, and that captures this probabilistic belongingness of the data points. So if I consider as a whole the whole data space itself, the probability density functions can be considered as the mixture of different probability density functions due to different clusters. So this this can be modeled. This is a kind of generative model for considering the probability distribution of the data. So we can explain in this way that as you can see that every class or every cluster is represented by the here it is GI is denoting certain class, and probability of X given GI is the likelihood functions once again. And so this is the density function. So you can express Px in this form. This is very well known from the Bayesian theorem itself. It is explained. So if I can model it, now your task could be, if I give you the data distribution, definitely you can compute Px very easily. But how do you get, I mean, empirically, how do you, if I can consider that, if I can explain this data distribution in terms of these components, that means there are k components distributions. Each component again has certain probabilistic occurrences, and then within the component there is a probability density functions for each data point. So how to compute these parameters, which means now the clustering becomes, yes.
So could you please explain what is GI? Is GI the classes or labels?
GI is representing a cluster here. GI is representing a cluster. It is not class. GI is representing a group. So you assume that there are k groups. Each group is represented by, say, GI. Okay?
Okay.
So the problem is that now I have given you the data points only. So how do you get these parameters? So now it becomes a kind of parametric estimation. You see that your K-means algorithm here, it boils down to as if estimation of parameters of these density functions, or the parameters are either density functions or the parameter, because if you consider the parametric representation, suppose they are Gaussian distributions, so you estimate their mean and standard deviations or covariance matrix as per the dimension of the data. And the other one is, of course, the corresponding probabilities of every cluster. So these are the parameters. So this becomes like that, this problem. Once you estimate, then of course your partitioning would be defined with respect to that probability model. So this is what, as I mentioned, these are the names. As you are asking that how do you call GI, actually it is considered as a component. GI is considered as a component, and probability of GI is the component in proportion. The component is basically looked as a cluster. So GI defines the ith group or cluster. Now it should be clear to you. And K is a hyperparameter, and it should be known once again. Like here also K is known. One of the simplistic assumptions, and one of the very popular assumptions in this problem, is that you consider them as a multivariate Gaussian distribution. And this is that in the multivariate Gaussian distributions, these are the parameters. You have the mean vector and you have the covariance matrix for the ith component, and your problem is to estimate all these parameters given the input samples. So this is what you need to solve for these problems. So when they are Gaussians, we call the density function as the mixture of Gaussians, and that's a term very commonly you may find in the literature. And which means that with respect to this clustering, you need to find out the estimate those parameters. And one of the interesting fact is that suppose because what is your objective of clustering? Once you get the partitions, now that is the unsupervised learning part. Given any other data point which is unseen but which occurs, then you have to basically compute its belongingness to one of these clusters. And as you have seen already, that it becomes like a classification problem then. Like you have the cluster representatives, and how do you compute? You can use 1NN, you can use KNN rules there. So you can use different kind of distance functions there. If I consider one of the distance function which is very much applicable for this scenario is that you can use Malanovi's distance function instead of using just the Euclidean distance function. So this is the definition of Mahalanobis distance function. You can see that it is normalized using the covariance matrix. So, so this distance function is used usually. Now, technique could be defined by computing probabilities of belongingness to a cluster. So, so this is how the density functions is Gaussian mixture of Gaussian is expressed. As I said, pi k is the mixing coefficient, or that is what is probability of um, I should say kth partition, and the other thing is the Gaussian distribution. So this method, expectation maximization algorithm, is used particularly for estimating these parameters. So this how it is it is used that first you, like k-means algorithm, say you have started with a partition, initial partition, and then you iteratively update it till you converge to a result. Here what it does also, you start with an initial set of parameters, and then you iteratively update till you find that it is converging the same way. So so there are expectation stage. Expectation stage is the kind of, no, you have expecting that this is a partition. So take that partition. That initialization is your kind of expectation stage. And then you compute those parameters. Now use those parameters again, again recomputing them. Because of the, you have the new probability density functions with these partitions, then parameters will be re-estimated and use them once again uh, once again to do the next stages of partitioning. So you should iterate it every time. You should iterate. So you go on re-estimating this. Every time you re-estimate these parameters with the new values. So this is what, after computing the, once again, you can compute the probability of probability of each data points, x belonging to k cluster, and you do this thing. So there you could have made a hard decision, but we are always reasoning with the probability. So that is what. So let me explain also. As you can see in the expectation stage, first you compute the probability of a data point belonging to kth Gaussian cluster. You can always compute, say, so this is how you can compute. You can compute uh, for the for the ith pixel. Here I denotes the ith data point. Sorry, not pixel. Ith data point. So for the ith data point, you find out what is the proportional uh, proportional values posterior for a class. What is the proportional posterior for a class, and then you normalize it. So Zi is basically a normalizing part. I mean capital Zi. So this is the posterior part, as you can see. This is computing proportional value of posterior, class posterior, or cluster posterior of kth value given I, right? And for computing the probability of joint probability of I and k, you have to normalize it, basically. Or you are normalizing the posterior, sorry, you are normalizing the posterior. So that is what, x belonging to kth Gaussian cluster. This part, assign x to the mth cluster whose probability is maximum. Now this is optional. This you may not do, because if you are going for probabilistic reasoning, computing probabilities is sufficient, but you may do it at certain step. So what you do then, you re-estimate these parameters from class distributions. So how are you re-estimating it? Once these, I don't know, probabilities are computed, then you can find out what is the expected number of, here I have written pixels, actually with respect to some segmentation algorithm, this has been discussed, but it is basically data point. So it is expected number of data points in class. You see that this number could be, in this case, may not be the whole number, right? But no, it's a kind of number which also handles fraction. We will be going with this. So then you find out with this you can estimate the mean and also estimate the corresponding covariance matrix. So you can see again, and also you can compute the corresponding no component probability, kth component probability. So this is what. So these are iterated. These are iterated till you get a convergence. So this is what you do, using Gaussian mixture model, and as I mentioned, the k-means clustering can be generalized as a mm, as a parametric estimation problem where you estimate the parameters for each clusters. Any questions? Because I'll be discussing a new topic, a new technique under this topic. So, uh, so we have so far discussed about the clustering that is at the just you can say only one description of clustering we have. But you know that in real life, even there are different levels these clusters can be described. Uh, that means you can have different categories, specializations under a broad cluster. So at the broader level, there could be some clustering, and then under it, there could be different other specializations. So we call them as a hierarchy of clusters. Now, hierarchical clustering, it it not only it solves that kind of partitioning problem, but also it no gets all kinds of partitions at different levels of hierarchy. So you have this. I mean, usually you can have a bottom-up approach that is more popular. So I'll be discussing the bottom-up approach here. Uh, the understanding or the description just I mentioned, that was a kind of top-down, like given a cluster, broader cluster, you break it into several specialized classes. Instead of that, in bottom-up approach, we start from the specialized clusters itself, and then we group them, which are closer together in the broader cluster. So this is a bottom-up approach. So one of the method, very popular method of hierarchical clustering is that it uses distance matrix among the samples. So distance matrix is very simple. It defines the all pairs of distances of input data point, and you represent it in the form of a matrix. So here, once you have this, then just using distance matrix, you can get a description of this hierarchy. You need not use any kind of feature representation for further clustering. And this method is a non-probabilistic method. So the method what I'll be going to discuss here, actually it is very much used in bioinformatics. So I'll be basically presenting these slides by one of the very lead researchers in bioinformatics, Pavel Krasnov, from his book. And here the context is that it is clustering different gene expressions or represented by genes, and their distances are measured using this expression. So diagrammatically, I have just shown here by the number here in a two-dimensional space. Suppose they are represented by two-dimensional points in a two-dimensional space, and their distances are represented by the distance between these points. So you can see that this is the kind of distributions over the geometric distributions over the space you have, and from the from the visuals itself, you can understand that there could be different levels of hierarchy. That means you can see at the broader level there could be 3 clusters, and in some cases, you can merge a few of them. So what it does, it it builds up from the bottom the clusters which are more compact relative to others. So for example, here it considers the distances of all pairs of points and consider the smallest distance, that means the nearest neighbors between nearest neighboring pairs, and that is considered as they belong to the same cluster, and overall that represents itself a particular group. So in this clustering method, it is required to measure the distance from a group also between the groups also. So since it is a distance based method, So it is not sufficient just to define the distance between 2 points. You have to also define distance between 2 groups. How do you distance between 2 sets of points? Groups mean sets of points. So there are, as you understand that intuitively you can define it different ways. Like if I give you 2 sets of points, you consider all possible pairs between these 2 sets and take their distances, take the average. That is one measure. There could be various other measures also. So I've just given you one example of that measure. So you go on merging always the closer groups or closer sets at a particular hierarchy to the next hierarchy. And in this way, uh, merging means you are merging those smaller groups into a larger group, including all of them. And in this way, you just simply build up this picture, this description in the form of a tree. As you can see that every point, every merging creates a node, and you just carry on merging till until you go to the root. So this is one simple example of hierarchical clustering. The description, uh, you can have this description, mathematical descriptions or algorithmic description in this fashion, that your your input is an n cross n distance matrix, and using these distances only you are computing this clustering. That means your distances between 2 sets, that is also defined using these distance values only. As I mentioned, you consider only those pairs of points which have one end is in one set and the other point belongs to the other set. Only those pairs you are considering, and their distance values are taken from the distance matrix, and take the average of them. Then you will get between the distance between the 2 sets. So just the same descriptions. You form n clusters, each with one element. That is the bottom description. The leaf, it's a kind of, they are all leaf nodes and they are the bottommost layer. And then you consider the graphical representations. That means each vertex would represent a cluster, and the edge from a vertex to another vertex represents the hierarchy. So that is what. So while there is more than one cluster, still you are doing it until you get one cluster at the root node. So find the two closest clusters, C1 and C2. Then merge C1 and C2 into C with these elements. Again, you compute the distances of the merged cluster with rest of the rest of the partitions what you have at that stage, rest of the clusters or endpoints, whatever you have at this stage. Each is represented by a cluster. So I would say compute distance from C to all other clusters. That is sufficient. And add a new vertex C to T and connect to vertices C1 and C2, because that is how you are creating the node, you are creating the tree. So in the distance matrix, you do not require the rows and columns of, like you do not require any information regarding C1 and C2, because it is sufficient if you have the information of the merged center itself, because you are representing distance from it to all other clusters. So you can replace it by that new distances. So your matrix dimension will be also reduced by one less of row and one less of column, that number of columns at every stage of merging. And in this way, you can reach at the node, at the root node, where your matrix dimension will be also simply 1+1. So these are certain distance measures. Like one of the measure could be you consider only the minimum distance of all these sets, or you can consider the average distance. These are few measures which I use. Now, this is about the hierarchical clustering approach, where you define the hierarchies. But you can see also actually the representation we have taken in the form of a graph, and using distance, we are doing this kind of clusterings. Now, there are clustering techniques which will actually use which represents the data distributions like a graph. And as you see that it forms the edges between two data points if potentially they may belong to a same cluster. So naturally, the edges could be formed as an inversely, the edge weight would be inversely proportional to the distance value. You can say that. Or you can consider a threshold value of the distance. So if the distance is less than that threshold value, then you form the edge. Then the whole problem would be like, you are trying to find out the connected components in the representation of a graph. Each connected component will be your cluster. But the issue here is that because your data would be noisy, so there may be some spurious edges. There may be some spurious edges which you have to ignore. Now that is the problem, and that makes the problem combinatorially explosive. And in fact, there is you can map this problem to a click finding problem where you consider that certain edges are noisy, and if you remove those edges, then you will get a better click graph than what you have presently as your data distribution. So we'll basically consider these approaches to do the clustering, and using these graphical methods. Once again, these approaches are also very popular in the domain of bioinformatics, and these techniques are taken from this particular Pavel Pevsner's book on bioinformatics. So let me give you a little bit of brief definitions of different concepts of graph. I understand that basic definitions of graph should be known to you. Otherwise, please read any book on data structures and also discrete maths. From there, you can get the definitions of a graph in terms of, from the set theoretic point of view, as a set of vertices and set of edges, and how edges are related to also set of vertices. So these are the pointers. You please read, and you will. They are very simple to understand, but you should know them precisely how they define. Now, when we have a graph, we call a graph is a click graph when its every vertex is connected to every other vertex, right? So a click, rather, it's not a click graph, sorry. A click is a graph when its every vertex is connected to every other vertex. But a click graph is a graph where each connected component is a click. So that is the difference, right? So we call a click graph, we call a graph as a click graph if we find its connected components are clicks. For example, you consider this. See, every component here is a click. Now, isolatedly, they are of course a click graph. Even if you take union of any combinations of these three partitions, like you take, for example, you take these vertices. Even this graph is also a click graph. This graph is also a click graph. This graph is also a click graph, right? Individually also they are click graphs. I mean, if you consider only those three vertices are there. So, I hope it is clear to you that what is meant by a click graph. So when I give you a set of data points for clustering, you can easily convert it to a graphical representation, as I mentioned, that using the distance matrix, by computing the distances between the data points, you can, and putting a threshold on the distance value, because you are assuming the the point should be close enough. So if the distance value is less than certain threshold, then you define the edges between data points. So every data point corresponds to a vertex in that representation, and every edge between a pair of data points is established if the distance is less than certain threshold. In this way, you form a distance graph. We call it distance graph. Now, the problem of clustering is that, as I mentioned, there may be spurious edges. How to convert a distance graph to a click graph with minimum changes? That is the problem of one of the problem of you know, click graph based clustering, or we call it click finding problem. So this is what is explained in this particular slide, that you can transform any arbitrary graph into click graphs. There are different ways you can do it, but our objective would be to get the minimum number of operations. So what are the operations while transformation? Operation is that you can add any edge which is not here. That means if there is any edge, if there are 2 points which are not connected by an edge, you can add them, or you can delete them even which is there. So these operations, so every operation means how many additions and how many deletions, you convert it to a click graph, right? So that is the kind of I should say strength of your result. So you would like to get that click graph which requires minimum number of additions or deletions, or insertion or deletions of elements. So this is your problem. So you can see that if I remove this edge and remove this edge, then it becomes a click graph. So the problem, once again, the formally, if I state that your input is a graph, as I mentioned, how the graph is formed using data points, and output is the smallest number of additions and removals of edges that will transform G into a click graph. So you can look at this way also, that you are giving the operations only, telling telling the machine or telling your computations that that what is to be done to get this transformation. Then of course the clustering would be the result of that transformation. But if I give you the set of transformations, that is sufficient to get the clustering. So you can look at this way. So this problem is called corrupted clicks problem. And as I mentioned, that you need to get a distance graph. So this we have discussed, that you can represent the feature vectors, which are data points. They are represented as vertices, and you can choose a distance threshold theta. If the distance between two vertices is below this, then you can draw an edge between them. So the resulting graph may contain clicks, and these clicks represent clusters of closely located data points. So how do you transform it into a click graph? So there are some examples are shown here from the same book. You can see this is your input, what is given to you. Once again, these examples are with respect to gene expression. See, this table shows the distance matrix where each column represents a gene. Okay. Now, how these distances are computed, etc., that background may not be necessary at this point. You know that they are basically derived from the gene expression data. So anyway, so you can see that with the transformation, you can get these clicks, and your clustering results will be this, that this is one cluster, these vertices or these genes are in one cluster, this is another cluster, and so there are 3 clusters, and you're getting this in this one. So the advantage of this scheme, as you can see, that the number of cluster is not known, right? Of course, it depends upon your technique. Sometimes that is also an input, but it not necessarily it has to be known. So by doing some kind of topology, analysis of topology, by doing some kind of structural analysis, you can derive at a click graph, and from the click graph, then you can find out that what is the number of component, or number of click components are there. So there are 2 methods that I'll be discussing. One method is directly trying to solve this one. Another method is with heuristic, which tries to get a, it is not ensuring that the click directly, but it is a kind of trying to solve that problem in a heuristic fashion. So as you can see that since it is combinatorially explosive, it's an NP-hard problem. That means if you consider that you are trying to find, if I give you the number of edges to be deleted and inserted, if I give you this one, then you can check whether the graph is click or not, right? That you can check. If I give you a graph, you can check whether the graph is click or not. So you can always pose this problem in this way, that by considering all possible transformations, you try to find out the minimum set of transformations which will give you a click graph. Now that is combinatorially hard. It is NP-hard problem. But there are heuristics by which, or approximate methods by which you try to solve this problem. And there are two such methods I will be discussing, but not today. Today I will stop here. And tomorrow, actually, I have a particular work here in the institute, so I will not be able to take your class tomorrow. And I think Joyশ্ree has already notified you that tomorrow's class will be meant for doubt clearing session. So you can clear your doubts about your assignments. You can interact with her and also the other TS in tomorrow's session. So tomorrow there will not be any class, and our next class will be on Friday morning itself.
Sir,
Any question? Yeah.
sir, like I was watching the recording, you have not mentioned which reference chapters to study for unsupervised learning.
I think some I have referred, but no, you please find out the Michel's book. There is a chapter on k-means clustering. Actually, it is a bit mixed. It is a bit
Okay, sir.
mixed because references are there in some slides, like Pevsner's reference is there on bioinformatics book, and Michel's book you can find, and also Alperin's book also you can find. So yes, I have not given the references here in the chapter wise, because it is uh, not very, I should say, um, very compact in every book. Okay,
Okay, sir.
it is taken from different sources.
Okay, sir.
Okay, so is there any other question? Okay, then thanks. So we'll meet on Friday for the class, but tomorrow there will be a doubt clearing session, doubt clearing class in the same time. Please attend that.